It's my Jane Austen July TBR. Hello BookTube, it's Marilyn Maya and welcome back to my channel. This year I'm going all in for Jane Austen July. Jane Austen July is a month-long celebration of all things Jane Austen. And last year was my first year on BookTube, and I kind of didn't know what I was doing, but this year I've been preparing all year, going to bookstores and just trying to find good books that have been recommended before. Our hosts for this readathon are Katie of Books and Things, Marissa at Blatantly Bookish, and Claudia at Spinster's Library. And they have wonderful videos that they're putting out, giving great suggestions for things to read for Jane Austen July. So let's get to the prompts. And remember, to say that you're doing the readathon, you just have to read one of Jane Austen's major works, and then you're in. So let's go. The first prompt is, by the way, their announcement videos will be down below in the description box. So, number one, read one of Jane Austen's 6 novels. So for this one, I haven't read Pride and Prejudice for a long time, and I don't know why, but I thought I wouldn't enjoy it. And I stayed up to 3 a.m. last night, almost finished, well, not almost finished, at least halfway through. And I'm not, I remember, but I don't remember. So it's so good, and I'm reading it too fast, and I think I'm going to go back a little bit because I'm ahead of the BookTube. BookTube is having a discussion group. I think it's hosted by Katie also. And I'm a little ahead. So I'm going to go back tonight and reread a few chapters. But it's a wonderful story about the Bennet sisters and their parents', or I should say their mother's, search for husbands for them. But it's so much more than that, so much more. I just don't want to spoil it for anybody who hasn't read Pride and Prejudice. And I think I said that it was a young adult book, this one that I have. Now, when I went to school, we didn't read Pride and Prejudice in high school many years ago. Now, they call it young adult. I don't think it's only a young adult book. It's very complex if you want to really get into it. So that's the first book I'm reading. The second book I'm reading, I tried last year, and it's Northanger Abbey. And this is a major work. It looks pretty small. So it's about 17-year-old Catherine Morland, and it's almost a coming-of-age novel. She goes to Bath. She's invited to spend a season in Bath. That sounds better than going to Bath. And the fashionable high society. Little does she imagine the delights and perils that await her. But I think she also finds out about herself more. And so that's why I call it a coming-of-age novel. I read half of it. It's sort of written in 2 parts. And I read the first half, but I had trouble with it because I was reading it with a very small font, and I gave up after the first part. So I want to start reading it from the beginning because I remember that I really enjoyed it. Okay, so those are the 2 full books or complete novels that I'm reading by Jane Austen. But yeah, there's more. So prompt number 2. Read something by Jane Austen that is not one of her main 6 novels. Now, I got this last year at Book Off, which is, it's in New York. It's a thrift book store in New York and other places like Hawaii, and I think Japan. I think it started in Japan. And isn't this a wonderful cover? Now, this is Lady Susan, the Watsons, Sandition, and the Complete Juvenilia. Now, I'm not going to read all of them, but I tried to read Lady Susan last year, but for some reason I didn't like the tone. It's written in letters, but this year they're going to do a read-along the second half of July, and I'm in. So definitely I'm going to read Lady Susan. And I might read Sandition. Sanditon, okay. Sanditon is the last work that Jane Austen was working on before she died. And I think there's 11 chapters. And I want to read this one before I read anything, because a lot of authors have completed the book, you know, without Jane Austen, of course. But I want to read, you know, the first 11 chapters. And I wrote down a little bit about what is it about. And so the novel revolves around another girl, Charlotte Hayward, and she's the eldest of daughters, still at home in a large family of a country gentleman from Willington, Sussex. So this narrative opens when the carriage of Mr. and Mrs. Parker of Sanditon topples over on a hill near the Hayward home. And Mr. Hayward is injured in the crash, so he stays for 2 weeks with her family. And he starts talking about his plans for Sanditon to make it like a summer resort. And then they invite Charlotte to go, and I don't know how far she's gotten into the book, but it sounds like it would have been a delightful story. So I want to read the first 11 chapters of that if I get the chance, and I hope I do, because I'm already halfway through of Pride and Prejudice. Okay, so what's the next? Oh, so let me just tell you also about Lady Susan. Now, Lady Susan is a woman in her 40s, and she has a daughter, and she's a naughty lady, and she's not one of Jane Austen's normal type of heroines. So she tries to, I think she's trying to get married to somebody rich, and also sort of double crosses her daughter. That's what I got out of the synopsis for Lady Susan. But like I said, let's join us at Goodreads for the last 2 weeks of July, and I'm sure that we'll get a lot more out of it, because I plan to join. So the next prompt is read a nonfiction work about Jane Austen and her time. So what I did was I went in the library and I got a book that's also young adult, and I finished it already because it was pretty basic. It's a basic book. It's called Jane Austen, A Life Revealed by Catherine Reef. So because I finished that, and you know, it's very basic and I knew most of the story before, I'm going to come back next week and tell you about more nonfiction that I'm going to read beside that. But the last part of the story is read a nonfiction work about Jane Austen or her time. And for this one, I'm very excited because I've got this book as a recommendation from Katie, and this is called Just Jane by Nancy Moser. And it is, so this is not nonfiction, but it's based on historical records. It's a novel presented as a journal written by Jane Austen, follows the author's life from her first love affair at age 20 until she is a respected author in her late 30s. So I'm looking forward to reading a sort of nonfiction book, and I think, you know, sort of nonfiction is not really nonfiction, but since it's based on the time, I thought that it would fit that prompt. Okay, so what's the next prompt? Prompt number 4 is read a retelling of a Jane Austen book, or, and this is new this year, a work of historical fiction set in Jane Austen's time. And for this one, I have a book that I bought last year, but I didn't want to read it because I wanted to read Pride and Prejudice first. And this is a retelling, a sort of retelling of Pride and Prejudice. It calls Death Comes to Pemberly. And it's a mystery. And if you know anything about my channel, I love mysteries. So how could I not put a mystery in here? And all I'm going to say, because I haven't finished Pride and Prejudice, is that it happens, it's a murder mystery that happens after the end of Pride and Prejudice. And since I haven't read the end of Pride and Prejudice, I kind of know what happens, but a murder takes place. And what I read about this that's interesting is that it's a pastiche. And I didn't know what that really meant compared to a satire. A satire, I just read a satire, which, you know, it exaggerates and kind of makes fun of the times and the places. And a pastiche is more of they're honoring the time and place that they're you know, talking about, or making a novel sort of copying that time, but in a way that's complimentary. So that was interesting, and I can't wait to get to this. This probably is going to be next book after Pride and Prejudice. And I'm also going to read Miss Austen by Gil Hornby, which has a very wonderful, people say a lot of good things about this book. So what is it about? Okay, for the 2 decades following the death of her beloved sister, Jane Cassandra Austen, so her beloved sister Jane, Cassandra Austen had lived alone, spending her days visiting friends and relations, and quietly and purposefully working to preserve her sister's reputation. Now in her 60s and increasingly frail, Cassandra goes to stay with the Fowles of Kintbury, family of her long-dead fiancé, in search of a trove of Jane Austen's letters. Now, if you know anything, and I learned this way before I even started doing booktube, was that Cassandra, the sister, had destroyed many of Jane Austen's private letters. So maybe we're going to find out something, and this sounds really nice because Jane and Cassandra really were very close. So I'm really looking forward to this book. And the next book I got at the latest sale that I went to at our Honolulu library sale, which I talked about last time. And it's a beautiful book, but I don't know if I'm going to get to it for many reasons. It's called Set in the Silver Sea by Jane Austen and a Gentleman. I got this for $1, and when I looked at it, I didn't know, I knew that Jane Austen didn't write anything called Set in the Silver Sea, but this is based on Sanditon, and it had very mixed reviews. People didn't even like the cover. They said it was unwieldy and hard to read, and that it was too long. It was 700 so pages. We don't really know what this is about, because the blurb on the back just tells about the man who, and he's like complimenting her and saying that he, even though he wrote the most of this book, it's the lesser part in quality. And according to some readers' reviews, he was right. But there was some good reviews in it. It's the thing that's keeping me from it is the size of it. And yeah, so I don't know if this is the retelling that I want to read, but you might. So let me know if you've read this. Was it good? Let me know in the comments. Okay, so the next prompt is read a book by a contemporary of Jane Austen. For this, I'm going to wait until I get other recommendations that I'm going to give you, but I think I'm going to read some poetry, maybe by William Wordsworth, who's a contemporary of Jane Austen, but maybe not. We'll see. And number 6 is watch a direct screen adaptation of a Jane Austen book. I got many recommendations of what to watch. I'm not big on watching adaptations of books, or I'm not a really big watcher of dramas on TV, so I haven't seen any of them. But everyone who suggests adaptation said that the 1995 Pride and Prejudice with Colin Firth and Jennifer L. was one of the best. So if I have time, I did get it. I got it from my library, so there's no excuse. And I will put this on my TBR and let you know what I think of it. It's on my TBR already. And number 7 is to watch a modern screen adaptation of a Jane Austen book. I did see the trailer for Fire Island, and I don't think it's up my alley, but I did hear a lot of good things about Lost in Austen, where it's also a modern retelling of Pride and Prejudice, where this girl goes back to Jane Austen times, and it's a time travel where they travel to her books to her time. So it's like a cross time travel. So it sounds like fun, and it did get good reviews on booktube. So far that's my Jane Austen July TBR. Have you read any of these books? Do you want to read any of these books? Let me know in the comments, and please subscribe to my channel. I would appreciate it, and please hit the notification bell and comment and subscribe. And I said that already. Okay, I'll see you in my next video. Aloha.